Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 218 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. You can try StrengthCoach.com out for 3 days, just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. Check it out at StrengthCoach.com. I'm your host, Anthony Renna, and the show notes are located at ContinueFit.com. It's where I have all of my podcasts, the Tell Me About That Book podcast, as well as Stop and Give Me 20, as well as Strength Coach TV. Remember, that's at ContinueFit.com. You can sign up for the Success Series I did, 5 audio interviews on achieving success in the fitness business with Coach Boyle, Geraldine Coopersmith, Alan Cosgrove, Don Saladino, and Ron McKeefrey. You can listen for free. You just need to sign up, and that's at ContinueFit.com. Check it out. Let me know what you think. All right, today on the Coach's Corner, I spoke to Coach Boyle about his article, My Kid is Really Good, Now What? As well as a forum thread that's been going really crazy right now. How strong do we need before working on speed improvement? That and much more coming up on the Coach's Corner in a little while. For the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment, Alan Cosgrove is on to talk about updating your stuff. It's time to throw out that VHS. Good stuff from Alan. For the Functional Movement Systems, we have on Eric Dagati. He's going to talk about a concept called owning neutral. And for the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment, I have on Daniel Martinez, the newly appointed head strength and conditioning coach at Trinity University. Going to talk to him about transitioning from the private sector to working with 16 teams at a university, how he's taken that approach, evidence-based versus evidence-led, how do we get them closer, philosophy and expanding on the athletic development model, training the female athlete, transactional versus transformational coaching, and so much more coming up from Coach Martinez in a little bit. Lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. Coach, how you doing?
I am doing great, Ann. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I just got, the problem is my kid, he's really good at hockey. Now what? You wrote an article that you released this week. Really, I love this article. It's a great article for parents, and we made it free so anybody could read it because I think it's a super important article that people have to understand from somebody, who's seen so many amazing kids with amazing above average ability at a young age, but then that doesn't really mean anything. Talk to us about this article.
Well, it's interesting because I started, as I say to you all the time, I start with headlines sometimes or titles. And so one time we were actually I was thinking about it almost as a marketing piece. And so I started, My Kid's Really Good, Now What? And so I just wrote that down, My Kid's Really Good, Now What? And then I just started to kind of flesh that idea out in my mind on a piece of paper. I got a kid who's pretty good at blank sport, and then all of a sudden people are starting to talk to him about club teams and about this and about that. What do I do? And it really is, as I think for our members, it's a great piece for parents. It's a great piece to sort of have around your facility. It's a great piece to post and put up. It's a great piece to post on your social media because one, it promotes what we do, and I kind of said that in the article in terms of I'm one of the people you have to worry about in one sense in terms of as the strength and conditioning professional is another person who wants your money, another person who wants to work with your kid because your kid is good. But I think I make the case for the fact that, and we should be doing it. We should be the ones that are doing it because we are the people who are probably most qualified to help that kid get there. And so it just was kind of one of those things. Let's put some thoughts on paper. And I've already had 3 or 4 people grab me at work and tell me how much they liked it because we put it out through our constant contact. I haven't put it out through my social media yet because I wanted it to be exclusive kind of to my clients and our members first. And then after it's been up maybe for a week, so probably beginning of next week, I'll start popping it up on my Facebook page and on a few other places so that we can kind of get some more views. Because one of the things I've started to realize with some of these pieces is stuff that we keep in-house doesn't necessarily get read all that much. A couple thousand people might read it, but when you're thinking that an article like that, you probably want a couple million people to read it.
We did have it in the newsletter, which the newsletter, when it gets published, does go to your. So some people did, some of your social media following did get to see that because people were retweeting our newsletter.
Right, and that's what's really good. And again, I look at that and think that's a positive because it's hopefully driving people. At least will see that strengthcoach.com logo and the strengthcoach.com banner, and hopefully they'll think, wow, there's lots of great content on this site. And as we said with some things, either at certain times you get it before everybody else, or you get this, in other cases, curated content where we pick up stuff that we see that we think they should see and bring it to them. So I think it's showing, in some ways, the benefits of both ends of the spectrum in terms of what we're doing with strengthcoach.com.
Absolutely. And, we obviously have this conversation on the forums, on the Q&A that we're doing every other week as well. So it's all good to kind of keep it going and help people. Because, look, it's easy to read this article and understand it, but it's still a hard conversation. I know, we certainly know a lot of really good 11 and 12-year-olds that are playing on these travel teams. We always bring up hockey, but it's what we know probably the best. But it's certainly true for baseball. I remember my buddy's been all over this country with his young son's baseball team when he was 14, 15, 16, whatever, even younger. But it's still a hard conversation to have to say, look, I know your son's good, but listen, there's a lot of good kids. You don't really want to offend somebody.
No, you don't. And what you really want to do, hopefully, is move yourself into the role of trusted advisor. Like, hey, this is somebody I can go to who's going to give me a really straight answer, because they're not looking for me to play in a tournament, and they're not looking for their kid to play with my kid because it makes their kid look better. And that's the big part of the problem, is there's so much of that stuff that goes on. It's really difficult. And I've seen it, as I said, I could literally write a book and go chapter by chapter with you and show you, different kids whose careers got screwed up because mom and dad listened to some guy, or even in some cases with girls, some woman who had no idea what she was talking about, but is positioning themselves as an expert in development, recruiting, whatever we want to call it. And suddenly that kid, and I saw somebody's Twitter feed, suddenly that kid becomes the tournament kid because mom and dad, and again, a lot of the recruiting now too is based on affluence. Who's got the money to go on tour with my kid all summer and go to 10 tournaments, because who can afford to give up all their weekends in the summer and plunk down $20,000 so that my kid can be on a team? And so there really is, and then there's the flip side. We'll pay for your kid. So my kid gets to get all this exposure, and someone else is going to pay his expenses or her expenses while they go. And you really have to be, as with so many things, you've got to be a consumer. You've got to be looking at this and thinking to yourself, what really is best for my child? And in a lot of cases, you're really talking about children. And I think that's the other part where people lose track of the fact that they're children. They're, in some cases, prepubescent. And you really don't know what the outcome is going to be. So it's interesting. And like I said, I hope we get a lot of people to read it.
Absolutely. It makes me think of, I train a young lady for a while now, and she's on the LPGA. And, this year she was on Symetra. She has like partial LPGA. But a couple years ago, she was dealing with some elbow stuff. And I was like, listen, you need to dial back the practice a little bit. You can't be just like playing all day, working out, and then going back at like 8 o'clock and, trying to hit balls again. And it's a similar idea. She said, you don't understand. She's like, the Korean girls are out there all night practicing. So you start to look at the other person. You have to understand, you got to run your own race. You got to put those blinders on and be like, do what's best for you. You can't look at somebody else. But she was so nervous about them, like they're practicing a lot and they're making some moves here. And I think what's what happened with a lot of parents, they see these other kids playing in all these programs, playing in the summer, going to camp, blah, 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 and they feel like they got to keep up with the Joneses.
Oh, they absolutely do. And I think that's that's what gets used against you, is that whole idea that you're going to be left behind. Because ultimately, I wouldn't say every parent, but most parents want to do what's right for their kids. Some parents are just looking for their own kind of self-gratification and self-aggrandizement. But most of them want to do the right thing for their kid. But a lot of times they don't know what that next right thing is. And so they rely on somebody who's not really an expert. That's why I always think, talk to the Greg Roses of the world. There's people who can tell you really how this is being done. And yes, obviously the Koreans, there are always going to be those sort of outliers, hothouse kind of phenomenons that are going to happen that may or may not be related in that case to how many hours of practice or how many balls they're hitting. Who knows? Again, but that was one of the things that they actually touched on in Outliers. But you just got to be careful who you listen to, and you've got to, I think sometimes you got to run it through your own little mental filter and think, we always, because we laugh. I mean, because I've been through it. I'm a hockey dad through and through. People always make fun of me. They are, you're a crazy hockey dad. And I'm like, yeah, I am. I'm just less crazy than some other people and smarter than some other people. And I said this to one of my clients. I think Michaela was the only 99 last year in Massachusetts, so 99, 1999 birth year, who got a scholarship to college. There were a bunch of 98s the year before, and there'll be some 97s the year after. But when you start looking at it, even in that, like in the 97 group, two of the girls that I know got scholarships were kids that trained with us pretty consistently. In the 97 group, there's 3 or 4 of the kids that train with us consistently. And it's hard, I think, for parents to look and draw the correlation. They may just say, oh, they're more talented or they're on a better team or whatever it is. And it's kind of like, actually, no, these kids they're working hard and smart, which I think is the combination of things that you're looking for. You need a kid that's willing to commit. You need a kid that's going to put in some hours. But you also need a kid that's going to put the hours in the right place. And in many cases, getting better at the things that they're not good at.
Really important, obviously. And I think also when I think of, just really quick with Michaela, I mean, just because she's your daughter doesn't mean she was going to get anything. I mean, she had that spark early on by being around those kids, those young ladies that were, incredible hockey players, and saw how they were just amazing people as well. And then she started doing the work. She was going to the gym. And I love in the article you talk about, you just say, and this is an important part, pros don't play year-round, but they do train year-round, and that as kids age, their skills get harder and harder to improve. However, the physical abilities still have a significant window of improvement, so I think that's the key right there.
Yes, and I think I tell people that all the time. It's so much easier to make a kid bigger, faster, stronger than it is to make them better. Skills, particularly the hard skills, if you start thinking about hockey sense and vision and all these things, those are much harder to improve. If you get a kid that can hit a baseball, okay, he can hit a baseball. If you get a kid that can throw a baseball, he can throw a baseball. And I saw a tweet from Cressy the other day, and he said, saw, a kid who went from, 5'10", 165 to 6'2", 200, and his velocity went from, 82 to 92. No big surprise. And he's right in terms of you can sometimes just manipulate physics to your advantage. And again, as I always say, for me, experientially, I've seen this. We had a guy named Eddie Ronan who played for us at BU, who ended up playing for the Montreal Canadiens, won a Stanley Cup ring with the Canadiens in the 90s. And when he came to BU, he was probably 5'10", 165 or 170 pounds. And I don't think anybody projected him to be an NHL guy. But when he left BU, he was a relatively similar player, except he was 595 pounds. And suddenly he was now big enough, rugged enough, good enough skater to be a good fourth liner in the NHL. And the real fundamental difference in him was 20 pounds of muscle and, and the speed and the durability and all that stuff that comes with that. It wasn't this like massive infusion of skill that he got in college. So
yeah,
that's the stuff that I know to be true because I've seen it over and over again.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Coach, let's move on to one last time. We talked about this yesterday on the Q&A, on the forum Q&A that we did for members, but just for everybody else, on the how strong you need to be before working on speed improvement. And we've talked about this a lot lately, but I loved Elsbeth's interjections here, talking about questioning that statement about a barometer of athleticism. Is it, she said, it's a component of athleticism, but is it really more important than the others? Is that Tony Holler was talking about the 40 being such a correlation to performance in the NFL, but the article had said it's not a great indicator of future performance. And you had some thoughts on this, so let's have you expand on that.
Fortunately or unfortunately, I probably have a whole podcast worth of thoughts on that. In terms of one thing I love about Elsbeth is Elsbeth always gives you a really intelligent take on things. I think the fact that she's got an engineering background and a consulting background always makes her kind of have really good thoughts and ask really good questions. So in one sense, I would say, yeah, she's probably right. But the one thing I would say is, even though speed is a component, in my mind and in my experience, it is the biggest component. It is the most critical component. And as I said yesterday, excluding skill, I mean, is obviously almost like the base level that has to be there. Okay, you've got to have a certain level of skill to be able to make it. But when you then take that, and as it goes back to the same thing that we were talking about in terms of improving skills versus improving speed, it's much easier to make somebody larger or faster than it is to make them more skilled. And correspondingly, I always say, no matter what the sport, if you take a guy or a girl and you say, I have the skill level will remain the same for the next 4 years, but the speed level will increase incrementally over those 4 years, I will guarantee you that player will be better every year. Because hockey's always the simplest example, but I think in every sport, soccer, basketball, where there's sort of loose balls, 50-50 balls, the faster person is going to get there. And then people will get into the debate, quick versus fast. And the reality is, again, all other things being equal, the fastest person is also going to be the quickest person. That's going to generally be the way that it is. And I guess that we could argue the semantics, we could argue the outliers. The argument, the point that I made in the thread was sort of the Michael Jordan athlete versus the Larry Bird athlete. I think there are certain, I guess, neuromuscular abilities that are not as easily improved in the weight room that might account for why Larry Bird might be in the same conversation as Michael Jordan. I think if we looked at it athletically, we would say, okay, I don't think anybody would argue that Larry Bird was as good an athlete as Michael Jordan. If we started to argue player, I think there are a lot of people who would argue that Larry Bird was as good a player as Michael Jordan. But then if you started to say why, with Bird, it would come down to things like shooting accuracy and vision and passing and all that stuff. And with Jordan, it was, dunking from the foul line kind of stuff where he just, could beat guys at will one-on-one and almost will himself to win a game on pure athleticism. Yet both guys probably had similar effects on their team in their time period. And I guess my point is, it's way harder to make what Larry Bird had than it is to make what Jordan has. And some people might argue that. I would not argue that, in terms of it's going to be really hard to improve somebody's mental skill set, the vision part, all that stuff. But as a strength, and I guess maybe, and I look at for us, it's our low-hanging fruit. You bring me a kid who has never trained before, and I'm going to look at you and say, yeah, I can definitely make him better. He's going to get in better condition. He's going to get stronger. He's going to get faster. All these things are going to get better. As a result, he's going to be better because we're going to show you the same skill set now, maybe for longer periods of time, or maybe for a greater level of consistency, or the ability to sort of negotiate time and space more rapidly. All those things are going to happen, yet the skills will remain the same. So I think, again, like many of the things that we talked about, it's a pretty interesting debate. But the most interesting thing is when you look at the thread, it gets so far off topic in the sense that the big thing is you don't need to be strong at all to work on speed. And that's the part that Tony talks about. Every kid should be out running, doing things fast, running short sprints. Because, again, it's an easy thing to do. And I was talking to somebody yesterday about slight edge, and it brings in mind that idea of easy to do, easy not to do. And I think that's one of the things that we have to be conscious of with sprints. How hard is it to say, okay, we're going to run 310s or 320s today? Or how hard is it? And then what I look at is how easy is it to skip, we'll go right to lifting. We won't do the sprints today. And I guess the biggest thing from Tony's stuff for me is that idea that this is really important.
Absolutely. Coach, have you seen, before I let you go, any of Jeremy Frisch's videos? You ever watch any of his stuff on?
Yeah, I love Jeremy's videos. The funny thing about Jeremy's videos is, and maybe it's just me, all I think about is liability when I see it.
You know what? I was there. I did a Strength Coach TV there. I agree. But at the same time, I think, we were on the playground when we were younger and there was liability there too. But I think you're right. But at the same time, those kids don't get hurt. They go bananas, and they're learning from an early age. And I think they're sprinting all the time. It's amazing, and they love it. He is doing such an amazing job, getting those kids to love what they're doing. And some of the videos he shows, 3 of them are his kids, that are his own kids. But a lot of times the kids come over from the school across the street, and it's not as crazy as that. But he really has an amazing way of training youth athletes. He's super passionate about it. So
yeah, he does. He does unbelievable stuff. It's just funny for me. Because I used to do that stuff with Mark when he was little. I'd take him in and I'd just build obstacle courses for him, and we'd put BOSUs in a row and hurdles to jump on, and we'd run with the ab wheel rollers. You know what I mean? Kind of a crab style run, or we'd scooter on the ab dollies. And there's so much stuff you can do. It's just I hate it because I think sometimes I am, when people say, "Oh, you're all paranoid about people getting hurt and you worry too much about this stuff," I would almost look at people and think, "Yeah, you're right."
Yeah.
I think I am too paranoid about it. I think I do worry about it too much.
Yeah, it's okay. It's a good thing too. So anyway, on that note, I'll let you go. Coach, thanks for doing this, and we will talk to you next time.
All right, time to take the kids to the gym. I'll talk to you later.
Hey guys, this is Alwyn Cosgrove joining you once again for the Business of Fitness segment here on the Strength Coach podcast. This is where we try to teach you guys some business strategies or operation strategies that can help professional coaches and fitness professionals not only help their clients with their programs, as you're already doing, but also help you with your business and how to do stuff. So this week's episode is called Update Your Shiznit, right? I was going to use the real word because this is the internet and you can do what you want. Update your stuff. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. And it's at a small gym you might have heard of called Results Fitness. We've been open for close to 18 years. So we've had an email database for 18 years. We've had a phone line for 18 years. We've had a shopping cart online for 18 years. Now, all of this is good. Everything's worked well, and we've no reason to change it other than the apps and the software and the tools you can get online have evolved dramatically, right? We can now do that. There's so many things that we're unable to do with our current software. Now, here's the thing. It's the best example I can come up with is it's like we have, for some things in our gym, because we're layers deep, we have VHS, and it still works. You can still record a show on VHS, and you can still watch it, right? And you can still, probably somewhere in the world, you can rent a VHS cassette of a movie and watch it. And remember, if you do, be kind and please rewind. But it's not that doesn't work. It's that we've evolved. We've evolved to DVDs, and we evolved to Blu-ray, and now we've evolved right past it, and everything's streaming. Right? Now, it doesn't mean that the VHS was bad. It's just that the current stuff is so superior. So this is an idea of auditing your business and going through every point of contact, right? You maybe can't just have a landline anymore. You might need texting. You might need some type of cell phone at your business for texting. We're going through now, and we are upgrading all our email databases, moving them to new servers and providers because the tools are so much more powerful than the ones that we're using. So the real lesson here is not, I'm not endorsing any services, but I'm looking at, let's go through every point of contact in your business, including your software and your email database, but also how you greet people, how the program looks. Are you printing out programs? Are you doing it on an iPad? Like, how are we recording sets and reps? How are we making appointments? And are you really using the best that technology and training has to offer? So it's really this concept of you've got to audit your entire operations line by line, right down to how do you collect the money? Are you still just taking checks, or are you completely evolved to EFT? Like I said, our breakthroughs, we had so many different little databases of lists. Combine them all in one place with so much more functionality. It's a little bit of a headache, but it's going to move us into the, really, really move forward in the future. So this week's lesson is really update your stuff. Make sure that you're current in everything that you're doing. And again, don't just get this confused. This isn't just about technology. It's about everything you do. Are you using the latest and greatest stuff? Right? Because there's so many tools you can use nowadays. Don't be a VHS player in a digital streaming world. That was this week's edition of the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment here on the Strength Coach podcast. You get any questions, you can hit me up via Facebook or in the Strength Coach forum, and I look forward to hearing from you guys.
Hi, this is Eric Dagati, and this is the Functional Movement segment. As an instructor for FMS over the last 10 years, this concept came to me when teaching the Level 2 component of the FMS education system. And the Level 2 is really based on the corrective components, really diving deep into the exercises. And the realization I had when teaching all the different patterns, starting with active straight leg raise all the way up through deep squat, and then teaching all the different positionings, going from supine to prone to quadruped up to half kneeling, eventually up to standing in the 3 different foot positions, realized that most of the corrections that we were doing were really looking to challenge something. And I came up with the concept of owning neutral. And when we look at that, when we realize where the body creates and absorbs the most force is in a neutral position. Let me explain further. So when you're at peak impact for swinging a golf club, a baseball bat, a tennis racket, when you make that impact, the best performance you're going to have is when you're in a neutral position from the foot all the way up to the top of your head. When you start to get into an overflexed or an overextended position, or side flexed or side bent overly one side versus the other, or over rotated, you're going to lose some not only force production but force reduction. So we're talking about in the reduction phase where you start to become more prone to injury, and in the production phase, in terms of improving performance, we want to be able to own neutral. So if we start with the basics, starting on the floor, and we look at neutral spine, what we're looking for is not for a posterior pelvic tilt like most people will cue in their core training. We're looking for neutral. So the best thing I'll do is to have someone learn pelvic position as a beginning, because that's kind of the epicenter of your center of gravity, and just teach someone what the difference is by having them tilt their pelvis all the way forward, rotate it all the way back, and then find their neutral, and realize that that neutral is going to be different for each individual that you work with. And then we start with that in a supine and prone. So whether you're doing a leg lowering drill or whether you're doing some sort of prone drill like a plank, our goal is to try to own neutral. If you think about a plank, all the moment is trying to do is trying to push you down, and you'll see the compensations will be overextension, as an example, in the lumbar spine. So your job is to fight back by creating not full flexion, but creating just enough flexion activity to fight the extension moment coming down from gravity. On the flip side, if you're doing something like a leg lowering or some sort of variation of that, the weight of the leg is trying to now, through the psoas, trying to create a lever to lift you into extension in the lumbar spine. Well, now you have to create just enough flexion activity to keep that into neutral. So those are just 2 examples at the most rudimentary level on the floor of how we're fighting to own neutral. We talk about crunches. That's not really core training. That's something that you'll get work into your abdominals. But what we're talking about is the ability to create motor control and stabilization in a neutral spine. And then we start with that supine and prone. From there, we can progress up to quadruped. And if you do your most basic bird dog exercise, what you're looking for is, as you go into hip extension, that we also don't go into extension at the lumbar spine. So we need to be able to stabilize the trunk while being able to freely move the extremities, both the arm and the leg. And that's a key function of the TVA and the inner unit. And then as we get up into more challenging things, eventually we'll get more of a global strategy in the stabilization there with some bracing. Then we move up into a half kneeling. Half kneeling, the more of a narrow base of support that you get into, you're going to start to have a moment where you're going to start to have some side bendings and falling right to left that you have to fight against. You may have some counter rotation that you have to work against, as well as front to back, finding that center of mass. And the cue that we'll often give is to think about being able to lift your front foot so it distributes the weight heavy into the back leg. Eventually, then we get up into standing, where we work into either a staggered stance, a single leg, or an open stance. And those are just the same, where we're looking to find neutral, starting at the foot. If a foot is overpronated or oversupinated, you're going to lose some force production and reduction, leading up into the hip, and then eventually up and through the lumbar and T-spine. So the cue that we'll often give is that we want to get you in a position that you can go anywhere athletically out of once we get you up on your feet. So if you were guarding someone in a basketball stance and you overlean to the left, you've now given them anything to your right side. And so now you're in a poor position to create force. You have to get back to neutral before you can even think about going in a position to make a play. So all these drills are really just looking at a way to challenge neutral. So when you start looking at your drills, that's what we want to start to do first at the cognitive level, and teaching them how to recognize what neutral is first, and then putting a force in it where they're forced to reactively stabilize that into a neutral, either spine or foot or knee. And then from there, what we can do is add a reactive component to it, where we look at something like the chopper lift, where we're doing dynamic movement through the upper body, where we have to do static control through the lower half. That's just some examples of the concept of what I call owning neutral. These are great ideas to think about how we pick our exercises, not just based on what looks cool or what muscles we feel working or burning, but true core stabilization is being able to own that neutral, because again, that's where we're going to create the most magic. For more information, be sure to visit functionalmovement.com. Again, my name is Eric Dagati. Thank you for listening.
All right, now it's time for the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach, and today I have on Daniel Martinez, and he is the newly appointed head strength and conditioning coach for Trinity University. He comes to the position with over 10 years in the sports performance field. I've known him for about 10 years myself, just from the strengthcoach.com forum. We spent some time in Texas together at Todd Wright's mentorship. Recently, he was working for as the U.S. consultant for ForceDex, had his own business with Entheos Athletics in San Antonio, developed organizing and leading physical preparation of teams and athletes directly and as a consultant. He's no stranger to Trinity as well. He served as an independent contractor as a strength and conditioning coach with the Tiger volleyball team. He's worked a ton with volleyball and women's volleyball. Daniel, thanks for coming on today.
Thanks a lot for having me. I was actually, I think, on episode 29. That was pretty early stage for you, so it's been awesome to see everything continue to grow. It's exciting to be back on. Thank you again.
All right, man. Yeah, same for you. It's been great to see, you're among one of those people that we've seen just kind of really grow from just some training, and you've gotten, you've done so much education and starting to really educate others now. And it's just great to see your progression. So, Sam Leahy had actually texted me the other day. He's like, man, you got to get Martinez on. He just got a new job at Trinity, and he was all excited for you. And I said, yeah, then would be a great conversation, especially because I actually had you in top of mind just with your work with ForceDex, and I wanted to call you and find out what was going on with your education for that, et cetera. But this is a good segue. So, I want to talk about this because, you were a consultant, strength and conditioning consultant for Trinity. With the volleyball team, and but this kind of scares me. Like, you now have 16 teams under your belt now, and talk to us about just like getting into this idea of becoming the head strength and conditioning coach from kind of the private sector, and doing some consulting, and what a bear of a project this is going to be.
Yeah, I think the perspective like that I feel like in, I think that my expertise would people look at as essentially bridging gaps between sports science and strength and conditioning. And I certainly feel like that was the perspective that helped me do well with ForceTex as an organization, and that we had like Dr. Daniel Cohen, who's like a very outstanding sports scientist and physiologist, and Dr. Philip Graham-Smith, who's like one of the world's best biomechanists, especially if you look at it from like his work in applied settings with elite athletes, like has done fantastic work. And so that for me has always been the challenge, is like helping people understand how you can better translate, sports science practice into strength and conditioning in the day-to-day. Like the way I always put it is like, we use sports science to overcome the to overcome the cynicism of sports science with the pragmatism in a daily strength and conditioning process. There's research from a group called Ovallo and Sibony, which was on business decisions, and it basically across 1,000 business decisions, they found that process trumped analysis by a factor of 6. If we combine that with the idea, like from someone like Mark McLaughlin, who talks about in order to train many people well, you have to first train one person well. Well, then you're seeing basically very concentrated coaching, and whether or not you can zoom out a little bit to capture different people's perspectives, meeting them where they are, right? Like the big thing in acute chronic workloads and monitoring these days is how did they get there, right? Well, the question is also where are they coming from? And then that should influence our perspective and how we provide support, where for me, I'm redundant if you listen to me, but I always say, who do they need to be? What do they need to do? Like, who do they need to be as a team, as athletes, and what do they need to do to, compete as their best? And if we can capture what that is, then we've got a real roadmap laid out for us and how we can best set out to achieve that. And that's all very central to me. I realize that part comes off as being more philosophical, but like I said, it's like in the day-to-day work, it's about coaching and taking advantage of every moment and every opportunity with athletes, from, a character and leadership perspective, but also all the way through team development and into individual coaching and repetition, right? Like figuring out how to do that best in an environment when you have 16 teams. It really just comes down to like, can you focus on what's right in front of you and keep in mind like what's important from a big picture perspective, but also like, know that like, that doesn't mean you water down your approach at all. Like I'm really the opposite at this point, where I'm very full on with each athlete, knowing that if I can get them to know that right now they're the most important, part of Trinity University to me. And then the same thing with every coaching conversation. There's a story. I have a dad that talked to me once about his son was a basketball player. And he told me once, he said, Daniel, every parent is the same. They want the 4 best kids on the court and their kid. And so I always tell people that with respect to sport coaches, right? Like it's like sport coaches are very much the same way, and they should be, right? Like as far as the athletic program at Trinity, for every one of those teams, they're like, hey, I want everybody to have fair treatment. I want it all to be, but when we're talking about my team, I need to know that you're giving me your best effort, right? And that's essentially what you have to be able to do, is capture like what's the best type of support that you can offer, and having a legitimate sports science approach to doing so is like, to me, is absolutely critical to reconcile the gaps that traditionally lie in strength and conditioning practice, where people are worried about how do they quantify their impact as a coach. That's something where, I've already, with respect to ForceTex, I've already tested, over 100 of our athletes at Trinity on dualforce platform testing just in the first week. And that's something that, from a time investment standpoint was absolutely critical towards some of the narrative and what I'm trying to establish. And that I think that was very helpful in some of the dialogue as well with some of the coaches with respect to some of the injury stuff that we picked up on without having much other dialogue in the background at all.
So, but I mean, I understand that, but at the same time, isn't your challenge going to be with all of these athletes now and all of, the importance that you place on some of this, on the monitoring, right? How do you do that with so many athletes?
Well, part of it is, it's really not, I don't know, I guess I don't view it as, to me, it's just always the way we do things. Like I've had people listen to me coach and they're like, I don't know how you talk to people that way. And I'm just like, I honestly, I don't know how, it doesn't make sense to me to think about doing it any other way. But at the same time, I'm like, when I look at good coaches in their practice, and then I think about the value addition that we add with force plates, like to me, there was a perspective prior to force plates that is honestly probably how my position took hold with ForceDex in that I was representing stuff that I was doing from a jump and a training perspective. And my early discussions with Dr. Cohen about it is he recognized the value in what that perspective offered to coaches and sports scientists who were looking to integrate dual force platforms into their environment. And that, I was basically just doing good coaching practice. And then now I was able to monitor and assess those changes. And some of that was really sensitive in the short term, which I always tell people there's a short and a long curve to training adaptation. And so if we can look at that and then better distinguish between what it takes to develop qualities versus expressing them effectively and efficiently, then now we're really in business in terms of, creating an approach where we understand that every rep every day actually matters, like which I alluded to in our previous talk just now is, every foot contact being an opportunity to bring us further ahead and closer to our goal.
Absolutely. Good stuff. I want to, like I said to you before, I feel like you're such a great representative of a guy that's in the middle of the evidence-based versus evidence-led kind of conversation. And there's this, pendulum that swings one way or the other. It seems like we have these this kind of divide in our industry. Mm-hmm. And then I forget how you pronounce his name. Martin Boucher.
Martin Boucher.
Yeah, he came out with that article. The Houston, we still have a problem just with the researchers and feeling like he feels like that we need to rethink the overall research publishing process. You've been published a few times, and obviously you have the plenty of in the trenches work. You have your master's degree as well. What are your thoughts on this, and how do we kind of do a better job of blending these two?
Yeah, I mean, some of it is I think you have to be sensitive to who influences you. For me, like the Edith Cowan program that I did was not a coincidence. Like I did my research and I understood who I wanted to influence me, and that included Dr. Jeremy Shepard, who's just been an amazing mentor, who's a little bit further in the background for me. But Dr. Sophia Nymphius, Dr. Greg Haft, Dr. Rob Newton, Dr. Mike McGuigan, like these are just like to me, it's like a who's who of like who does quality work that impacts the field in strength and conditioning and sports science. And then understanding that they're trying to solve real problems. Like one piece of research that gets glossed over a lot is the sprint momentum piece, which is, like when we talk about changes in college athletes, which there was a recent, Twitter discussion on this, which is, it's relevant here because when we see these changes in athletes, sometimes people are like, oh, they get stronger, but they don't get any faster. And it's like, well, momentum is mass times velocity. So if we take the 40-yard dash and we say, okay, well, they're running around the same speed. Maybe they're even a little slower. Maybe they're a little bit faster, but they've gained 40 or 50 pounds as a college football athlete. They have greater momentum, and that could be an important durability factor on the field. Now, the challenge to that is that those athletes should also be training speed in a way that respects skill acquisition and respects let's say the quality that you need an equal focus on, or let's just say a proportionate focus on, that you could also that whole time have also been developing speed. Well, those things are not, that's not something that, it's not an either or approach, right? Like it's something that we can combine that, and then we can be more specific and more concentrated, and we can figure that out as, let's say, a collaborative transdisciplinary team where sports science helps to better inform strength and conditioning, and strength and conditioning better inform sports science, right? Like it's not, it's a false dichotomy in my mind.
But how do we kind of get these two ideas a little closer together?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you just have to like realize that, in respect to research doesn't resonate with you, like recognize that not all research is inherently bad, right? Like there's good stuff in sports science research. There's tremendous stuff from J.B. Moran and Pierre Samazino right now, Dr. Sophia Nymphius. For people internationally, I don't want to go off on like, who I think's research is good and whose is bad, but like you have to ask if are they is that piece of research, is it just about, piled higher and deeper via like the PhD kind of thinking way, or is it something that you can take and apply into your setting, right? Like the research that I had published through my master's degree were basically reviews on science that I felt like would better inform people with respect to each paper. One was on volleyball and vertical jump with respect to the development of power and capacity. And the other one was on metrics used to monitor jumping performance, reactive strength index and reactive strength index modified. And then the other paper was on velocity-based training and autoregulation. And that was a case study of me spending 30 days squatting to a max and then doing reps based on that percentage and using velocity loss as like my fatigue indicator to determine when I should, stop the sets. Like that was me just giving my best crack at something that applying science to a good, training process, and then just looking at what the science, or with respect to science, meaning the research, that what the research says about those things. And then, the RSI mod stuff and RSI stuff points back to people like Dave Hamilton and Stuart Cormack, who, again, do fantastic work, who would be the first ones that tell you, like, if it doesn't better inform practice and help you make better decisions, then I don't know how important it is. I don't care what a good sports scientist is telling you it is.
Yeah, but do you feel like we either need more people like you, coaches in the trenches, who are doing some of the research, or like, because for example, in the article that he was saying, he was like, a lot. The problem is a lot of these a lot of coaches out there, a lot of in the trenches coaches aren't reading those publications or attending the sports science conferences. Where is the disconnect in the language? Is the disconnect in the I don't know where it is, but what would you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of different perspectives that fit in there. And I guess the main way that I put it is that, like, your limitations won't be mine. Like, if you're not prepared to use science and evidence-based to help you better inform, decisions that you make in your training, like, that's fine. But I actually have a slide in a presentation that I'm doing at the NFCA North Carolina State Clinic next week, but it's the Super Mario Brothers, like the beginning, whatever the title page for the game. But instead of saying Super Mario Brothers, it's super cool story, bro, which is ultimately like, we just become two people with an opinion if we don't have an evidence base. And there's different levels of evidence where you can use your practice as effective evidence. It's just, of course, that doesn't weigh as heavily, nor should it, on what the research says through more, let's just say, more strict, more of a strict evidence base. And that we have to be sensitive to that, because that piece is, if you know why what you did worked and it worked well in your environment, are you equally sensitive to why it didn't work and why it wouldn't work somewhere else? And so that's the piece where, again, in what I accomplished previously in consulting is being able to match people's demands based on their environmental constraints, whether that was the NBA or the NFL or Olympic sport, et cetera. Like, being able to do that and zoom in or zoom out and find the appropriate way for, to use research via my presentations and education to better inform what they're doing in the day-to-day process, or zooming them, in on, like, let's just say specific, exercise techniques and strategies that they can use towards potentiation or towards, identifying eccentric specific pathways that they can use to better, develop, specific training adaptations. Those are all just different narratives. And I just feel like that's probably, like what I said to you before is, my line is, pro basketball loves my volleyball stuff, because who am I kidding? Like, a huge chunk of my career has been spent with female volleyball athletes. But the second part of that piece is that it's not the volleyball stuff, it's the concentration behind it, like the quality behind the repetition and the drills and the way that I structured things, that I feel like that it's my belief that is what made that approach attractive to strength and conditioning coaches and sports scientists in the NBA.
Yeah, and do you think that, so you feel like that volleyball lens is kind of helped in terms of, this idea of even some of your research seems to be skewed, like, that was your lens.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, by and large, and it's not like I wasn't coaching other athletes that whole period. Like, I have a pretty extensive, like, with jumping athletes, especially track and field, but yeah, like, volleyball was a big part of it. And, I was involved in club volleyball for a time, which Coach Boyle was one of the first people to tell me that he thought that was a mistake for someone like me, which, I didn't listen. And that was, it turned into be probably the perfect lesson for me at the time to know that I didn't want to be involved in the private sector as more of an administrator, that I wanted to be a coach first and foremost. And that pointed me in many ways back on my trajectory towards a master's degree and towards the path that I'm on right now. And I'm grateful for all of the experience, because I feel like, a lot of those conversations with parents that I had at the time, like, helped me to understand that, in club sports respectively, like, the insane are truly running the asylum. And, that's going to take us to all really circle back and look at how we provide solutions, whether that's at the collegiate level or professional level, because the stuff about long-term athlete development is largely dead. So you have to think, okay, if it's dead or if it's never been harnessed or developed or captured, like, how do I get that rolling in an environment where there's an expectation for performance outputs that are completely out of line with what this athlete's level of development is?
Yeah, and let's segue that into kind of your philosophy, and that we were talking a little bit earlier about, you had mentioned in your email to me about, expanding on the athletic development model and how do we kind of apply that in this situation. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so something like this, like if we talk about like Patrick Ward and Charlie Weingroff and I were talking once, and Patrick was basically saying, like, well, this is why we like the beep test, is because when the athlete finishes and you take the pacing strategy out of it, you don't have the mile where they're like, oh, you ran in this time, let me use this to prescribe stuff for you. You have a 10. And now that athlete knows what giving a 10 feels like, that they've gone to failure. And then you can tell them, now we reflect on that 10 via your conditioning, so we can better inform our monitoring piece, as well as better, like, narrow the margins through which we have error for whether or not we're effectively training the mechanics and the physiology behind, developing better, let's just say, aerobic capacity or aerobic power. That what it's going to take for us to move that to where you can demonstrate that more effectively. So that's basically the approach, but it has to be specific to not just, the conditioning element, but also to the strength power elements, but also to the mechanics and the skill acquisition elements. And how you have to dilute that in the early stages is getting people to understand that, we've got to put things into buckets. Like, Charlie's bucket is the one, or buckets are the one that I use: movement, output, and readiness. And then we figure out where our solutions need to be driven from. And by and large, early stage movement challenges are the challenge. You definitely will always have athletes who figured out how to develop gas pedal in the absence of good quality movement, but we'll capture a large chunk of our needs in movement specifically early on. And that can be done with very basic, more structural pieces, athletic development models, stuff that, progressions that, are more classic but are no less valuable, like Vern Gambetta's approach for one, Coach Boyle's for another, like where, you're looking at things that the structure is there to allow enough repetition to be performed to develop those qualities efficiently and effectively.
Good stuff. I like the way you put that. Daniel, you've worked with so many female athletes as well. I want to get your take on training the female athlete and some things that you feel like, because I was actually reading, I forget where the interview was. I was reading some of your stuff on that was really interesting. And talk to us about your approach with a female athlete.
Yeah, so that's one of the pieces for me. It probably segues a little bit early into the transformational versus transactional stuff, but a lot of times is I think because females aren't as classically, weight room enthusiastic, that you've got to find a way to demonstrate a value addition and that what you're making a contribution towards early on, and you have to be sensitive to their interpretation of that, and that you don't have any control over it. Because you're really positive on your approach doesn't mean that's the way the athlete's response is going to be. Mm-hmm. So how it shapes my approach, I guess I feel like my approach is fairly standard. It's probably just the fact that I always tell people, because you're not doing your job doesn't mean I'm not going to do mine. So with female athletes, sometimes that comes into where, because they're not as well trained in the weight room and they're not as enthusiastic about it, like their attention to detail and to their technique and to their performance may fall off at times because they're just not as into it. So to me, I'm on top of those things. And there's times where I've not been effective, and I've had that talk with Coach Boyle. Him and Charlie and I were in Austin having a beer, and I asked him, I said, Coach, I coach my butt off, and there's days where I'm watching a kid, I've corrected them, we've put them in the right position, we've constrained the exercise properly, this is what's right for them, and I turn around, I'd look again, and they're doing it wrong. And he's like, oh yeah, 51st dates, and I was like, huh? And he goes, you start all over every day. And I was like, that's exactly what it is. So to me, it was just like, and again, it's like with kids like that, I'm like, yeah, hey, I'm prepared to start all over every day, and I'll give you what I have. And far more often than not, that approach has been effective, especially as I've demonstrated that I'm more sensitive to the fact that a lot of the skill development stuff, when we're talking about, let's say, phase progressions, that I'm willing to challenge the boundaries of those things by looking for qualities like elasticity that a lot of people will classically define, let's say via PE, that people say, oh, well, we see that on the playground all the time. But yet that's a phase 3 or phase 4 or phase 5 activity in strength and conditioning. Well, that's just never made any sense to me. So I've challenged, my thinking over, many years now with that approach, and have adapted my system to reflect, basically we just get better quality repetition on, let's just say, qualities like that much earlier in training than other people do. And the repetition that we're able to put behind that, because of the nature of, let's say, club volleyball schedules or jumping athlete schedules, that because they jump so much, it's forced me to keep volume and repetition low, and that's helped me, create a system that I can create a jump training plan to fit virtually any environment.
Absolutely. It's funny you said the 51st dates. I'm glad you said that because I felt like with my lens in an older population and golfers, so many times I felt like that. Like, man, am I doing it wrong? And I'm going through all these, trying to get other cues. And It's interesting because I think, you got to meet them where they're at too sometimes.
Yeah, and that's what I have a lot of approaches that I feel like are effective in capturing athletes' attention. One of the things, let's say with breathing, is I have to tell kids, hey, this is a real thing. This is not something that if I had something more important to talk to you guys about, I'd be talking about that. But because I'm talking about this, I'm telling you that this is important, and that no, you're not breathing. So that, with respect to that, it's not that, you're doing that part wrong. But in terms of optimizing that relationship, we know we've got a lot of room. And we also, even if we don't even think about the breathing from a stress pattern perspective, we know that kids are off their rocker and what they feel like they can put their attention and time towards these days.
It's so true. You mentioned transactional versus transformational. You feel like it's a false dichotomy. We were talking earlier about it. Expand on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so basically, a lot of coaches, and you can have rah-rah guys, and then you can have people who are very technical and just aren't as emotionally connected, right? But those are I realize those people exist, but, the vast majority of us are not those people. At the same time, my perspective is that sometimes your value addition will be predicated on the fact that as a technician, that you can make a difference in that athlete's performance. And if you can do that, then you've got them right in the palm of your hand, and they'll do exactly, they'll run through walls for you, right? If you can do that. And then you've really laid the groundwork for identifying what's really important for that athlete. I had one athlete today who, we had a great lift together. We had a good chat. And then I'm walking to the dining hall, and we're walking together. And then she's like, I hate eating here. And then I'm like, oh, okay, well, what do you eat? Lots of fast food. And I'm like, okay, well, now, let's experience this together and let's capture that. So my experience with her via our weight training session has bought me some credibility now. And then we can go into that and translate that into our dining hall, et cetera. And that process will be laid out and multiplied and repeated, hopefully through every step of impact that you can have in your program.
Good stuff. I feel like it just comes down to my favorite quote, nobody cares how much you know till they know how much you care.
Yeah, it's in so many ways, it very much is, caring is also transactional, right? We could also be hey, I care intensely that you run faster and that you beat this kid's butt. right? Like, and then it's also like, I love to watch you play, which is a great phrase for young athletes to keep them encouraged, especially for your own kids.
Yeah.
Like that becomes, like, to me as a coach, it becomes, I love to watch you work, right? Like Nike has a shirt that says, watch me work. And I like, that was like my favorite shirt that kids would wear to come train. I'm like, man, I love that. Now they have other shirts that I despise, but you know, there's good stuff. There's a good line from Steve Jobs, which is just a good general, like, do less, better approach, where he says, he was talking to a Nike VP and he says, you know, you guys do great stuff and you do crappy stuff. Get rid of the crappy stuff.
Nice. Well, Daniel, I've taken enough of your time, and we really appreciate it. I'm excited for you. I'm excited for your new job and watching you grow. It's been great, and we always appreciate you coming on the show. So thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Anthony.
All right, well, that's going to do it for episode 218 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Special thanks to Chris Poirier and the folks over at Perform Better. Right now, Perform Better is having 30% off selected items and free shippings over $59. Restrictions do apply, so check it out. The schedule for the one-day seminars has been announced with dates in New Jersey, San Francisco, LA, Tampa Bay, Boston, Durham, Atlanta, and Tacoma. You can check them out at performbetter.com for all their products and info about their educational seminars. All right, thanks to Coach Boyle and Daniel Martinez for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength and conditioning and performance enhancement. Alwyn Cosgrove for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. Check them out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com. Eric Dagati and Functional Movement Systems. Check them out at functionalmovement.com. And of course, remember, you can try strengthcoach.com out for 3 days. Just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. Remember, we're doing the Q&As every other week there as well. To access that offer, go to strengthcoach.com. Click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. My name's Anthony Renner. You can go to continuefit.com. Make sure you sign up for the Success Series, 5 audio interviews on success in the fitness business. Thanks again, and I'll speak to you next time.